All right, the next chapter in your religion deals with, focuses in primarily on biological design and the um, two uh, views that Paulos is critiquing, I guess, would be creationism, which I'm not sure if he's using that as to refer to young Earth creationists or all creationists, but creationism and then intelligent design. And I'm glad to see that he does distinguish between the ID movement and creationism because they are certainly very different. But I was very dismayed to see that he misunderstands ID. And this is something I've said many times before, and I'm going to keep saying it until somebody pays attention. ID does not say evolution didn't happen. Okay? ID proponents are theistic evolutionists. Okay? So Ken Miller and everybody else, let that sink down into your head. ID is a form of theistic evolution. Another misunderstanding, which Paulos and everybody else who speaks out against ID has, is that irreducible complexity means that the system, if you have a bacterial flagellum, for example, he uses blood clotting in this book, which is another classic example of putative irreducible complexity. Um, all of the pieces have to be in place for that particular function, the blood clotting or the motor and the flagellum motor, to function as they do function. That is correct. That is what irreducible complexity is. That does not mean that the parts couldn't have been that most of the parts couldn't have been present earlier in the organism, and the organism with those parts have a different function. Okay, Ken Miller's tie clip. It's a mouse trap with just the base and the spring that clips off that breaks the neck of the mouse. That is okay. Okay, Michael Leahy allows for that. It's still irreducibly complex because the mousetrap has to have all the components to function as a mousetrap. Okay, and similar mousetraps are possible to be designed. Behe allows for that as well. So ignore those two straw men. Irreducible complexity allows for parts of the system to be present earlier in a simplified system that has a different function, and it's not uh, in opposition to evolution. Okay, that's not what ID is. All right, so the main first the main objection to biological design that Paulos raises in this chapter is evolution. We'll get to that in a minute. First, I have to point out that he brings up a misunderstanding about God, which is very kind of sticks out like a sore thumb in The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins as well. Dawkins and Paulo say, well, if we posit God as the designer of life, then that raises a bigger question of who designed the designer. In other words, the designer, God, is going to be more complex than the designs that he has designed. He's going to be more complex than the animals that he created and the plants. Um, so that's not a good thing to introduce. It makes the problem more difficult to explain, not less difficult to explain. Well, this is a misunderstanding because God is not complex. Classical theists have said that one of God's attributes, one of his essential divine attributes, is simplicity. God has no parts. And if God is immaterial, remember the Christian view is that God created matter, time, space, and so on. He created that. So if he created that, then he is not himself within that. He is not limited by a material body. So a material entity can have multiple parts. A spiritual entity that's not made out of matter, that doesn't exist in time, is not going to have multiple parts. That's not what spiritual entities are like. Spiritual entities are undivided. They're simple. They don't have parts. Um, it's not that God has a part, over here and another part over there. No, God is a whole, simple entity. So that objection doesn't hold any water at all. The main objection to the biological argument from design that Paulus gives, as I said, is evolution. But this is, I would think, totally irrelevant. Evolution, if evolution has occurred, and the evidence for that, I'm told, is quite good, that yes, there has been evolution from common ancestry over the eons of time. If evolution occurred, what does that matter? It's irrelevant. God can work through natural processes. Over and over again in the Bible, we see God's miracles being through nature. For example, when the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, God caused a wind to blow the water out of their way. So wind is a natural phenomenon. Water being blown by wind, that's natural. God is using nature to accomplish his purposes. So God could, if there is a God, and if evolution occurred, there is no reason why God couldn't use evolution as a tool for his design. A carpenter uses a hammer as a tool to build a house. But because a hammer is used to build a house, that doesn't mean that there's no carpenter. It's an intermediary, it's a tool, the hammer, or evolution. So if there's evolution or not, that doesn't matter in any way, shape, or form. The design that we see in the biological realm, and we do see design in the biological realm, that points to a designer. That designer all men call God. If there was a committee of gods, if there was a God who was alive and then he died, some of these things that Hume brought up in his dialogues, in the mouth of Philo, that's totally irrelevant. What the designer is like doesn't matter. The fact that the designer exists, that is what the argument is trying to show, and you cannot be an atheist or an agnostic once you've encountered this argument, the teleological argument. So yes, there is design, evolution is irrelevant, and the design in biology points to a designer, and that designer is God. So two strikes. Both the cosmological and teleological arguments are not shown to be unsound in anything that we've looked at so far. And if it's three strikes, you're out, we're going to see that John Paulos is definitely going to be out. After we look next at the ontological argument, none of these criticisms are very compelling to reject the classical arguments of Christian apologetics. So his purpose in writing this book, to summarize these, well, the subtitle is "A Mathematician Explains Why the Arguments for God Just Don't Add Up." His critiques just don't add up, so we can still accept those arguments. Alright, next and lastly we'll look at the ontological argument as Paulos addresses it. Shalom out.